Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today lives in Bern with her Swiss husband and is a dual citizen of Switzerland and the U.S. She grew up in San Juan, Vancouver, and Stockholm, and has lived all over the United States. Since her teens, she has worked in a variety of jobs, from forewoman in a truck engine factory to lecturer in sociology to cross-cultural coach for multinational firms. Writing remained in the background until her son left for college, and she decided to write a novel. Pesticide, the first mystery in her series, is the result. It was shortlisted for the 2020 Debut Dagger Award by the Crime Writers Association. She has a BA from Harvard and a PhD from the University of California-Berkeley. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Kim Hayes.
Thank you, Julia. I'm very pleased to be here.
Kim, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, it's something I've thought about. I will say that I grew up reading, and my family, and particularly my mother, but both my parents were big readers. So a person who wrote a book in my family seemed to, nobody said this, but it seemed like a person who wrote a book was a pretty important person. And I did like to write. So I would, a lot of my jobs throughout my adulthood were whether freelance writing when I lived in Boston for a weekly sort of a magazine / newspaper that came out once a week with cultural stuff. And I wrote funding proposals for nonprofits, and I wrote teaching materials later on for some curricula. And then also I was a teacher for a while, so I wrote materials for that. So I feel like I kept on now, for various jobs, there was always writing going on. But the truth of, to answer your question, why did it take so long? I think I was just scared. I think that it seemed like a really important thing to do, to write a book. And it wasn't as I think some people come to writing a book because, in fact, maybe most people, because they have a pressing need to deal with a subject, something that they want to tell people about themselves, or something that they want to teach people about, not necessarily in a preachy way. And it wasn't like that for me. It was really more, I wanted to write a book. It did, of course, it then mattered what book, but the first thought was not the subject of the book, but that I really wanted to write a book. And finally, as you read, it seemed like when my son went away for college, and it seemed like if it wasn't going to be now, when was it going to be? And at that point, I was 58. So I took the plunge.
Well, good for you. It does seem like a daunting task, because when we print out, these 70, 80, 100,000 words and look at all of those pages with all of our words on there, you just wonder, how did all of that come out of me?
How did we do that? Exactly. And is it readable? That's the second question we always want to know, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have to ask because with a BA from Harvard and a PhD from the University of California-Berkeley, pray tell how you became a forewoman in a truck engine factory.
Well, I went I went to Sweden for a year after college, and it was at a time in the mid 70s when it was when Sweden and a number of countries, but particularly Sweden, were trying to make factories more interesting and more, not just interesting, that's a silly thing to say, but more interesting for workers. In other words, to give them more responsibility to make factory work. If you think of the Charlie Chaplin-esque cliche from modern times, to give people, make the work more interesting, to make what people did have more meaning for them. And so I went to work in a Swedish factory for 4 months, I didn't plan to do this for my life. I was very lucky that they were willing to take me on to work on one of their assembly lines, one of their experimental assembly lines. And then when I came back to the States, I was all fired up to see if I could make, again, not wishing to be a factory worker or foreman for the rest of my life, what it would be like in the States. And let me tell you, I didn't last too long in the States as a factory forewoman. My desire for experimental experiences in sociology was defeated by the experience of being on a real assembly line as a foreman.
I can only imagine. You've lived all around the world. How have the places you've lived affected your writing?
That's interesting. I think that when you live different places, visiting them is very important too in vocation, but when you live different places, I think you realize how hard it is to describe people of different cultures in a way that's realistic. You want to convey that this isn't just the person next door. If you're an American, that this isn't just the average American, if there is such a thing, but that this is an average person, a normal person, but that they're Swedish or they're Swiss or they're Italian. And that doesn't make but you don't want them to be a cliche. So I guess everyone knows this, but at the same time, it's very hard to do in writing, to try to convey an Italian. One of my detectives is of Italian descent in my book, in a way that makes it clear he is an Italian in many ways, and he's different from Americans and he's different from Swiss, but he isn't, running around eating spaghetti all the time. I mean, I'm now being silly, but I think you see what I mean.
Yes, I can understand that because I've only traveled there. I haven't lived outside of the US. So it always fascinates me about all of you expats who are living what we think are just such exciting lives living around the world. I really like the explanation of the Swiss German dialects in the front of your book. I'm fascinated by how many languages Europeans speak because, I barely speak one. And we moved to a German settled town in Texas, and German was spoken here, and articles written in the paper were written in German until World War II. So that is interesting to me to hear about the dialects. Did you choose a publisher for your book in the US or in Switzerland?
Well, you are very kind to say, did I choose a publisher? Is a very kind wording of the reality. I did want to publish in the US, failing that in the UK. I write in English. I couldn't write, I can write some German, but I couldn't write a novel in German. There are a few small publishers here that would publish something in English, but they're not serious publishers. So I wanted an American publisher, and it took me 7 years to find one. So, and that includes being turned down by, I think conservative estimate, 80 agents with US, and then I switched to the UK, maybe 70. In any case, I was very lucky that a publisher finally chose me, and that it is a small publisher, but one that I'm proud to be with, because they publish only mysteries, and that's what I'm planning to write. And their authors have won some prizes in the past, so that, I feel good to be with them. But I also feel, more than anything else, extremely lucky to be with them.
Well, that's certainly not uncommon. We hear that more than we hear, I sent it to the first person, and found an agent and a publisher. We hear more commonly that we sent out query letters to 100 and never heard back.
Yes, and that's it. You're lucky. When you say turn down, that's when there's long silences that you have to finally assume, even after you write them a second time, means that they're turning you down, because it would be really kind if they actually would turn you down. So, but it does work sometimes, you never know. Just have to keep trying.
Tell us what this first book is all about.
Well, I'm glad you said I will. And let me just say, it is a first book. So in the course of the 7 years I started writing maybe 9 years ago. And then, I wrote the book, and then I rewrote the book, and then I thought I had it ready. And in the course of waiting to get published, I wrote 3 more books in my series, because I just, it sounds brave, but actually it was kind of desperate. I kept thinking, well, maybe if I write another one, it'll be better. So I already have a series of 3 mysteries with the same detectives. Starring the same people, set in Bern. It's two police, a woman and a man, and they continue. And the 4th one is, I'm revising it. So there are gonna be at least 4 in this series. I can promise that. My book is about, the series is called Polizei Bern, which means Bern Police, because it does have the people who, it's a police procedural, and the main character is a woman detective who's in her mid to late 40s. And she's a homicide detective, and she has a husband who's a freelance journalist, and two kids, 10 and 15. And I mentioned this because that was very important to me, that I make both my detectives be people that are trying to be good police and still run a normal life, and not lone. I like lots of detective stories where there are loner detectives, or they have all kinds of problems and divorce. But I really thought it would be fun to make the detectives have more life than just the office. And Juliana, that's the name of my main detective, has an assistant, Renzo, who is an Italian Swiss. So he's born in Switzerland, but his parents were Italian, and so he is bilingual and he speaks Italian with his family, but is perfectly Swiss in the office. But everyone knows from his name that he's of Italian descent. And they work together very, very well. And they are faced with, at the beginning of the book, 2 murders, which from all appearances have no connection. One is happens during a riot. Bern too has riots, even though it's Switzerland, and this is actually based on a real riot that I saw. It's a rave that turns into a riot, and a young man is killed with a policeman's club. And a young policeman admits that the guy, attacked him. He felt threatened, and he hit the person who's dead. He hit him once, but he says the guy was fine. He didn't even fall over. It wasn't a major blow, with his baton. And that the policeman threw down his baton and ran away. So yet the man is dead. So what happened? And then out in the country, there's also the same weekend, a farmer is killed on his farm, an organic farmer, and he is sprayed with pesticide. So there comes the title of the book, and it is about how these two cases come together and how then the two detectives have to work together. And complicating that is the fact that the young man, he's not that young, he's married and has kids himself, he's in his 30s, has a crush on his boss. So, and he's very attractive. So this is a complication in both their lives. So it's a mystery, very much so, with hopefully the right complications to keep people reading, but there's some romance in it too.
Was this the genre that you read for pleasure? How did you get into writing the mysteries and especially adding the detectives in there?
Well, I think that when it came time, I guess I would say that I always read mysteries. My mother was a big mystery reader. I read mysteries. I read lots of other things. I mean, mainly as a child, I read children's books, of course, classic children's books, including Heidi. And I never knew I would be coming to Heidi country. But I definitely, that was the genre that I really liked to read most, starting with Sherlock Holmes and Nancy Drew and, you know, going on. And so when I wanted to write fiction, it really became very clear to me that the kind of novel that I would want to write would be a mystery. And I am a person, maybe it's why I live in Switzerland, who likes process. I mean, when I read a detective story, I like to see how it's solved. I don't even need to guess myself. I just really want to see how they figure it out step by step. And it frustrates me when a book, you know, suddenly makes something happen that you think, that's not fair. That's not part of the process, you know, drop something down that you feel sort of wasn't part of the process. So I wrote a police procedural. It's not because I wish I had police perhaps if I had police in my background, I would have known, of course, they would have been American police, and the Swiss police are quite different. So, but this was the style that I wanted to do.
You know, with all of us girls who read Nancy Drew, I'm surprised that more of us are not detectives.
Yes, you would think. And the kind of private detectives that, well, yes. Although I read the Hardy Boys too. I read more Nancy Drews, but when you run out of Nancy Drews, you've got to do something, right?
Yes, they were great books for children.
Yeah, they were really fun.
Why don't you give us a little setup and read a few paragraphs for us to hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay, I'd be glad to. I had to pick something that wasn't a spoiler, you know. It's always hard to, unless I read the first pages, which is what people read in the bookstore. But let me see here. What's happened is that a farmer has been brought in to be basically interrogated in the police station. And he is a childhood friend of the farmer who has been murdered. And everyone in the village knows that these two older men, this man that I'm about to read about, he had a falling out with this friend. He's 76 because he is not an organic farmer, and the dead man, it was an organic farmer, and this farmer got very upset when the pesticide blew. The dead man got very upset when pesticide blew on his crops from his neighbor's field, which is something that actually all happens a lot, if easily. So he is somewhat suspicious. He's a suspicious character in the death, although, well, I won't say anything more. So he has just been interrogated, and the young detective, Renzo, has been instructed by the older man who did the interrogation to play the good cop. So the interrogator has been the bad cop, and really nothing much came out of it. So now Renzo is playing the good cop to this to this man. So he is going to buy him a coffee in the cafeteria in the police station. So this is Renzo speaking. "Sorry for that grilling," he said as they got to the staircase. "Why don't you let me buy you a coffee before you go? Our cafeteria is just down the hall." Niklaus, that's the farmer's last name, Niklaus pursed his lips, looked toward the way out. Then he shrugged. "I never turn down free coffee. Lead the way." The basement cafe was quiet at that hour, with only a few groups talking shop as they lingered over late lunches. Niklaus put a large milky coffee and a jelly donut onto his tray, and having unloaded them at a table, held out his hand to Renzo. "No more Herr Niklaus. You hear? I'm Jean-Pierre." Renzo smiled at him as they sat down. "I've been out to a few of the Seeland farms now. It seems like back-breaking work. Do you think you'll retire soon?" "Of course, my wife will kill me if I don't retire." "My father was a fireman," Renzo told Jean-Pierre, which meant his retirement age was fixed. He had to stop, but he didn't want to. After he left the job, he felt smaller, maybe. Niklaus smiled. "Well, not me. I plan to enjoy my retirement. I'm just waiting for my younger daughter, Jeanne, to get through her studies. She's in Zurich at the ETH. That was interesting. She was at the best institute of technology in Switzerland." Renzo tried not to look surprised. "Did you go there too?" he asked. Jean-Pierre threw back his head and crowed. "Are you joking? I shot out of school like a wasp was after me when I turned 15. But my baby girl's different. She's studying to be an agronomist," Niklaus said. He downed the last of his coffee and gave Renzo a sly look. "That other cop kept trying to talk me into confessing that I went to Frank's on Friday. Well, I didn't." "So you said, over and over. But he never asked me if I was there any other day of the week." Renzo stared back at Niklaus, who was clearly waiting for him to respond. "So, were you?" "I sure was. And I think what Frank and I talked about was important. But your buddies seem more interesting in hassling me than finding out what I know, so..." Renzo couldn't help but laugh. "You old fox," he said. "Were you going to walk out of here without telling us your piece of news?" "You never asked me, did you?" Jean-Pierre said smugly. "But now that you've bought me coffee and a donut, well..."
That's
So I'm not going to tell you the piece of news, but
That's very good. Writing about crime and criminals is kind of a balancing act. How do you create characters that people want to root for, or at least have some compassion for?
Well, it's very nice that you asked that question because it's something I think about a lot. I definitely want my detectives to be appealing people. There are definitely very good mysteries out there where the hero is an anti-hero, and there are a lot of qualities that the detectives have, the police have, that make you have very mixed feelings about them. And whereas I want my detectives to make mistakes and to think about what they're doing critically and to realize sometimes that they've screwed up, I want them to be likable. But I also want my villains I try to make my villains be people that at least you can understand why they've done what they've done. I can talk in the plural since I've only published one book, but I've written 3.5, and I am troubled by making a psychopath into a villain, because then you don't really need to understand the person. Well, of course, they can have terrible childhoods, and I'm not saying I haven't read very good books with psychopaths in them, but as you say, I think it's important to understand, I don't want to make my bad guys not bad, but I do want to make their actions understandable.
Did real world Swiss political issues shape pesticide?
It's certainly my interest in organic farming, and not just my interest, but the fact that about 17% of farms in Switzerland are organic. They're not exactly controversial, but what is controversial is the whole, I think, and very political, is a lot of discussion, not just in Switzerland, but in general, of is organic farming, would it be the right thing for the world? In other words, could the world be fed if everyone farmed organically? And I think that there's some evidence that it could not be, that, the amount of labor involved, the way that it's done is so labor intensive. For example, if you can't use pesticides, you really do go, you go and actually, in many cases, take bugs off your plants. I'm not saying, it depends on the size, but that is one of the methods. They are allowed to use things like soap and water. There are certain materials that are considered okay for farmers to use, chemicals that organic farmers are allowed to use. So it's political in the sense that we're all trying to reduce our carbon footprint, use fewer chemicals, protect our groundwater, all of these things, and Switzerland too. And at the same time, we don't want to give up cheap food. And in fact, since the book was written, not since it was published, but since it was accepted for publication, there actually was a vote in Switzerland against the use of artificial chemicals. So basically, all pesticides, and it was defeated. So although we talk the talk, we don't always want to walk the walk, because the farmers lobbied, not the organic farmers, but generally farmers lobbied very hard to say, look, if we have no pesticide, we won't be able to produce affordable food, and everyone will just buy their food from other countries. And it's, they have a point. It's not a simple thing.
No, and it's such an interesting and pertinent topic, for all of us these days. What kind of research went into pesticide?
Well, I had to research the police, of course. I had to know, if I'm going to make two characters police detectives, I had to try to know quite a bit about the police. And I won't swear that everything my people, certainly not everything they do, is what real police do, because I just couldn't manage that. I don't know enough for every step of the way, but I have a neighbor who's a high-ranking policewoman, thank goodness, and she really did talk to me, answer questions, and then read my manuscripts. So I told her, you don't have to fix every little thing, but if you think something would make any Swiss police person who read it fall over laughing, then you better tell me about it. And of course, the other thing was, I visited organic farms, and I visited places where organic food is processed, and I talked to people who sell organic food. So I did. There's also quite a bit about marijuana in the book, and there too, I didn't talk to any marijuana grower that I was aware of, but I did talk to I'm only thinking of the German word, the public prosecutors, two public prosecutors in Bern who prosecute, who know quite a lot about the drug business, since they're involved with trying to stop it, regulate it, deal with it. So that was very interesting. Those, I think, were the main things I had to research.
A lot of our writers over 50 and writers under 50 have the same issues with marketing our books. Writers like to be alone in their office and writing, and don't want to put ourselves out there and do all the publicity that we have to do these days, even those with the big five publishers. Did you have any challenges with publicity and marketing? Anything that you could share that actually worked, or especially those things that don't work?
It is a huge challenge for me. You've really hit the nail on the head. Writing the book is hard enough, and getting the publisher, all this stuff you get, and you finally get it published. And then we all have this dream that we just sit back, or well, we start the next book, and the publisher, and of course, especially if you have a big one, as I do not, but then you imagine that they're going to just work so hard to get this book sold. Well, I know that I knew beforehand that wasn't true, but I didn't realize how challenging, it's a good word, it would be. I think the hardest thing for me, and this, I am now 67, the hardest thing for me is that I have never been on Facebook. I have never been on Twitter. I did not have a blog. I was not following anybody else's blog. And suddenly it is very important. Forget Instagram. Everyone says now, no, what you really need is Instagram. So I'm sure Instagram is wonderful, but there's only so much a person, this 67-year-old, I'm sure there are others who are very different. So for me, this idea that I should make very good use of the media, the social media, is particularly difficult. I have come to peace with the blog because that's writing. So, I have a website. It's only, most of it you only write once, or some of, at least you don't write it every day. And then when you post on it, it's just writing little essays. So that's something I put that I can do, but I can't quite get the hang of tweeting and retweeting and commenting. I'm doing it. I'm working on it. And you feel like, well, this is writing too. But I'm sure you asked me because I'm not the only one who feels this way. And I don't have any, I wish I had tips. I guess what I appreciate was that my publicity person, who's actually at Books Forward, she put me in the position of she got in touch with blogs that were looking for essays, for people to write essays, and then they would publish the essay, and that was a way for me to get some publicity. And they didn't have to. So that was something, again, put in that context. If you tell me, please write an essay, and I say, what about this? That I can do, as long as it's just straightforward writing. It's funny, but it's different when you have to tweet. Or what do you think?
I think it's very difficult and pulls us out of the business of writing.
Exactly.
Even writing those essays takes you away from your novel writing that you want to be doing.
Exactly.
It takes such a large amount, a chunk of our time to do all of the marketing and the publicity. So it really does take us away from sitting down and writing, and also reading for pleasure. I think writing has really changed my reading. Now I have to dissect the books that I read, or find a typo, or I become an editor reading these books instead of just reading for pleasure. So that's why I use audiobooks and listen, because it feels like somebody's telling me the story and I don't have to look at the words on paper. Do you make time to read for pleasure?
Well, you took the words out of my mouth, because and this is just the last few years, but I am a huge fan of audiobooks, because whether you're a writer or anything, or you have any other career in this world, you still have to, most of us still have to cook a meal, go to the store, run the washes, and do a number of other things that don't require the brain. And I'm sure that's when some people come up with their plots. But what I want to do then is listen to audiobooks, because that way I'm getting some reading in while I'm doing, life maintenance. And I also like to walk. So, if I walk for an hour, sometimes I pay attention to beautiful nature, and sometimes I'm away with the fairies listening to my audiobook. So yes, I mean, this is really a problem. This business of needing to, of wanting to read more. And if writers don't read, I think it's hard on them. That's how we feed ourselves.
It really is. And it triggers such memories of childhood or something that we're not even listening to, but it'll trigger something in our brain that we can put on paper in our own work. And so that's why I really like listening to audiobooks. And I do that when I exercise. It's the only time I do that. When I drive, I try to listen to podcasts about the craft of writing.
That's very interesting.
That helps as well. There's some really good podcasts out there about the craft. Well, Kim, this has been such an interesting time with our international visitor today. And why don't we end by asking you if you have any advice for writers 50 and above? Maybe something that you wish you'd heard when you started out in this second, third, fourth career.
I don't feel that I have something to say that is very different from what other people say. I guess one thing I would say is, which is pretty obvious from my perspective, is don't give up. Although I'm sure there is a point where it's sensible to give up. And I did over and over. I don't want to make it sound like I always knew. I didn't at all. And I must say, every few months, I would say, first, should I self-publish? Well, should I give up totally? And also, should I self-publish and stop looking? So I would say that this, I mean, it's true. I think one thing you can say is don't feel you're the only one who gets discouraged. I think it's very important to realize that it's not a very positive thing to say, but that discouragement is just a part of the process. And I was very lucky that I had my sister. I mean, I did have other people reading my work, but I had my sister, who is 2 years younger than I am, who also grew up reading many of the same books I did. And my sister was such a cheering section for me. So she would read draft after draft. She would say, she would read almost, there was never anything she didn't like. And of course, a piece of me said, this is my sister, I mean,
she has to like it.
But it's still great to have somebody reading your stuff who will occasionally say something critical, so they're really reading it. I think that's really all I can say. One more thing I would say is I found it very annoying when people would say, well, if you truly love to write, it shouldn't matter that you aren't published, because writing is something you do for the love of writing. And that would make me want to really almost throw up, because that is just such an annoying thing to say. I mean, yes, maybe, people write music that's never heard and people paint pictures that are never seen, but that's not what they want. People want to share their creative work, and that's perfectly normal. And I think it's perfectly okay to keep trying to get your work out to other people. So
I agree.
I guess that's my advice.
I agree entirely. I think our work is our legacy for who comes behind us, whether it's our children or grandchildren or just strangers who are affected by our stories. I think if a story is in us, it has to come out, as William Faulkner said, and I believe in my fellow Mississippians' words there. So thank you so much, Kim, for making the time to be with us today from Switzerland. And we are so happy that you're one of our authors over 50.
Thank you very much, Julia. I really enjoyed talking to you, and good luck.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.